Hello friends, welcome to another little video about Listurbia, and in this video we are looking at part 3. I've added some new sticky notes to my book, by the way, which is going to help me find things now that I'm really getting into the thick of this book. We'll have a look at them maybe later on. Now, part 3, here are the things that I wanted to notice, and it may not come as a surprise that Part 3, Hoggle and Labyrinth and Life Inside the Oubliette, I think. The part where everything falls apart, if it hasn't already. Maybe no surprise, the first thing I want to notice is that it starts with yet another boring list, apparently. Again, not necessarily boring. I'm saying that provocatively. Let's say dry or information-based, you know. In terms of narrative, as a piece of writing inside a narrative, it's missing dialogue that would give us a point of interest. It's missing imagery to paint a picture of the scene or the setting that the narrative is taking place in. We're getting some information here that is kind of dislocated from the rest of the narrative. So when I say boring, that's what I actually mean. But the reason I wanted to say this one again is because not just notice the list. Yes, but it makes me then think, hang on, is every single one of these parts starting with one of these dry lists? If you haven't noticed that before, notice it with me now. Oh, common cognitive biases is part 1. Then in part 2, strange facts about mirrors. And then here in part 3, strange facts about memory. If you want to skip ahead at this point, especially if you have finished, and have a look at part 4. I'm not going to do it in case you're not reading ahead, but they also start with lists just like this. So a device there in the way that this narrative is getting structured, perhaps with facts about the protagonist. Or just random facts. I don't know. You decide. All right. Point number 2 that I want to notice here about part 3 of Listurbia is, you probably noticed this yourself, but the instances of drinking go up in a very big way, and instances of self-care. We kind of see self-care deteriorate even further in this list. So straight away after we hear the strange facts about memory and we get into a list that is about the actual narrative again, the story, the first thing we see in this part is quite disturbing. She's emerging from the blackness with a violent, dry-mouthed gasp. And as she emerges, here is the list. Things I do and think and feel and remember as I wake up on Wednesday morning, 1st of November. And one of the things is thinking about the empty vodka bottle. Now, the last time we met the protagonist in the story, she was opening another bottle of Chardonnay, I think. She was having Chardonnay at the hotel. She'd poured another glass of wine for herself before slumping on the lounge. She thought she'd probably drank too much at lunch. And then we get the overnight, okay? Overnight, strange facts about memory, next morning, okay? And now there's an empty vodka bottle. And we've not heard about that in the story, but we can make the inference, right? So the drinking has gone up. She's wondering if maybe she should have something stronger than Panadol. And we've got a few references through there. So those of you who are looking for instances of drinking and poor self-care as indicators of how this character is being characterized, how the protagonist is being characterized. Plenty of indirect characterization there. Okay, number 3 thing I want to have a look at involves another piece of paper. Have you started a timeline yet for this book? If not, it's time to start a timeline. It is time to get out your study notes. Perhaps work with a friend, perhaps work in your class. Some classes might have already done it together, I don't know. But the timeline is not insignificant. So part 3 starts with strange facts about memory, and then emerging from the blackness, it is the morning of Wednesday, 1st of November. Okay. You may recall from reading part 2, it was the one where Halloween seemed to go on forever. So I started to take a flick back into my book here and kind of work out then how long part 2 actually covered in time. All right, because Halloween did feel like it went on forever. And when I got myself all the way kind of back towards the start of part 2, we could see that really it had started on a Monday, right? There was some things happen here. This is Monday night with Scott and the pushing the dinner around the plate. That's Monday night. This is on the way, getting to work. Here we go. Monday, the 30th of October. Things I noticed through the window. And this is where she sees the brown-skinned boy, right? This is the start of part 2. And see how by doing this kind of analysis and sticking with the puzzle of what does this all mean, the structure of this story, what does it mean, what do these lists mean, the closer you look, the more sense it makes. So part 2 very strictly goes from Monday to Tuesday. We get those 2 days in depth with a couple of little flashbacks. Wednesday morning we wake up in a terrible state. That led me to wonder, as I'm doing my timeline, let me fill it in all the way back to part 1. What does it cover? And when I did that, I noticed that part 1 starts on a Friday. Okay, we get our facts, we get things happening, the things that scare her, and then we find out that it's Friday the 27th of October. As we edge closer to the start of the story, it begs the question, right? Where in here is the official start of the story? According to this narrator, which for us looking at it as readers might not be the start of the story, because of course that's all the way back here, but is the start of her story the big complication? In which case, what is the big complication? Is it remembering Samuel? We'll get to that in a moment. So here we go. It's page 11. It's Friday. And then when I tried to flick through this to get more facts about when Saturday had started, you flick through and try and find it yourself. It is fuzzy, right? Saturday doesn't quite start, really. We get references to over the weekend. So we know time is passing while these lists pass. Things she wonders about over the weekend, the last days before our story truly begins. And then all of a sudden it's Sunday, right? Falling asleep on Sunday night. So this imprecise idea of time and time blurring or being not significant to the narrator because the story hasn't started yet. Again, you decide. What's the purpose here of that time blurring? Falling asleep on Saturday night. Often I'm noticing that moving to the next part is a sleep. It's not all of the sleeps. There were plenty in part 1. But here we go, Sunday, she falls asleep, and then we wake up in the Monday. And that happens to us again here, right? Part 2 into part 3, we fall asleep at the end of Halloween and we wake up on the Wednesday. So little things like that that you can notice if you start your timeline. You've seen some of mine. I've made some good points, I think, to encourage you to keep up with that. Go do a timeline. Okay, number 4 thing to notice about part 3 of this book, it's the middle part, is, of course, we find the name, page 87, of, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but Samuel Arthur Latu. Samuel Arthur Latu, I think. Latu? That's what I'm never sure about. Maybe it's Latu. You let me know. Samuel Arthur Latu, we actually find the memory here, and she's been trying to remember, and she's had a hunch that she's supposed to be remembering something increasingly build throughout this part, and then finally we remember her own voice speaking a name that zaps me like an electric shock through my mind and forces the face of the boy near the train tracks into view. Samuel Arthur Latu. Things I suddenly remember, and we see again this use of ellipsis, plural, ellipses, to indicate pauses or lapses before, boom, here we are into part 4, which we'll talk about next time. So things that we remember about Samuel is that they were very, very close when they were about 4 and 5 years old. They were best friends at the time. They hung around all summer. and things were a little bit unsettling. Sometimes they killed squashed animals, and sometimes Samuel was scary, but we don't know why, and that's all we know. And boom, it's part 4. So important plot point, finding out about Samuel and starting to remember this is all coming back. I wanted to quickly say about this 5 and 6 because I knew I'd talk for a while about those, so I just thought I'd chuck these in here to say. Notice again, I've not just marked up my parts here, but I've started adding a few more tabs up here for important people that we're meeting. And in part 3, importantly, we meet Priya, the friend, and we get a sense of what this friendship or this relationship is like. We get some clues that Priya and Scott haven't met after all this time, which does seem a bit weird, and it gives us some questions again to ask about Scott. So here we get some clues about the character by meeting Priya, you know, and seeing a glimpse of their relationship. And we also meet the protagonist's sister, Allie, and her niece, Tamara, who've come over to her place, but she forgot that they were coming, so it's all really, really stressful, right? So I won't dwell in these other than to say